Neil Orfield here, founder of the Flannelverse. If you don't know me, all you really need to know is that I'm obsessed with fantasy sports. I've been playing for decades, and I've won a lot of money at it, especially in DFS, where I've won the NFL Millie Maker on DraftKings, and if you remove the Millie Maker, I'd still be up hundreds of thousands of dollars with a dozen wins of $90,000 or more. In the past, I've primarily been a hand builder and an optimizer user, but in 2026, I think that's playing on hard mode, so this year I've upped my game, I've partnered with Run the Sims, and throughout this NFL season, I've been demonstrating how I'm using Run the Sims to try to win a lot of money again this year. I hope you'll join me and that we'll win a lot of money together. If you're interested in checking out Run the Sims, you can use promo code Neil to get 50% off your first payment on any NFL product at Run the Sims. If you haven't already done so, please do like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to get to 7,000 subscribers and I could really use your support. Without further delay, let's get into how I'm setting up Run the Sims for the Divisional round 4-game slate on DraftKings. Now, I've already run the Sims once, and I just want to show you what I did for what I always do for the first run of the Sims, which is I don't change any of the inputs. You can change inputs both to the team level and the player level. For example, you can change the number of points you expect a team to score, the number of plays you expect them to run, rush rate versus pass rate, and then you can change things at the individual player level, things like rushing market share, receiving market share, etc., etc. All of that is customizable, but I like to run the Sims first just using the default inputs at Run the Sims. First of all, because they're generally going to be very good. These are some of the best DFS players in the world doing the inputs at Run the Sims, so I want to see what I'm going to get just using their numbers, but also because there might be some things that I want to change to get to the players that I really like on a given slate, and I don't really know what I need to change before I see what I get naturally before making any changes. So I have Run the Sims already once using the default inputs, but the only things that I did change is in this settings, I did change for the types of contests that I play, which are the largest field contests, typically on DraftKings, like the flagship contest, the mini max. Those are the types of contests that I typically play. So to set up for those contests, I changed these to 10,000 lineups, 15,000 size of the contest field. So that's the largest you can do, the closest to the large field contest. And then the maximum number, 10,000 simulations. I also changed the payout structure to top heavy because typically the large field contests that I play have the top heaviest payout structures. And then finally, I use the Shady Portfolio Diversifier. This is of course an add-on, so it's not going to be available to everybody unless you sign up for that. But I really like the Shady Portfolio Diversifier because this comes from Shady Advice. He is a DFS pro, one of the best players in the world, and what really sets him apart from other DFS pros is his portfolio diversification tool. This is going to give me lineups that don't cannibalize each other, not going to be too similar to each other, and then it's going to minimize your risk of ruin over the long term. It's a really sophisticated tool that I don't know how it works. Nobody really knows how it works except for Shady Advice. We just know that it does work because he has won a lot of money. So I did use that. And then I set the number of lineups in my portfolio to 150. Obviously, you're going to set this to however many lineups you plan to play or have in your portfolio. You can, of course, do multiple portfolios, different types if you want to. But I'm just going to use the 150, which is the max in most contests. So I ran the Sims by clicking this button. It takes a few minutes for the Sims to run and then to find your lineups, and it'll go here naturally after you run the Sims. But you click this Sim Runner Pro button over here and you can find all of your lineups. Now I'm going to read off the first few lineups here, and then I'm going to get into my player exposures. I will note first off that these are not in order of EV. That's because I'm using the Shady Portfolio Optimizer. If you don't use the Shady Portfolio Optimizer, you're just going to get your lineups in order of their EV. But because I'm not getting them in that exact order. It's still going to be generally really high EV lineups at the top. So looking at my first few lineups, top one is a CJ Stroud triple stack with Christian Kirk, Jaden Higgins, and Dalton Schultz. Does not have any Patriots bringbacks. Also does have Christian McCaffrey, DeAndre Swift, Khalil Shakir, Puka Nacua, and the Bills defense. Second lineup is Drake May triple stacked with Demario Douglas, Stephon Diggs, and Hunter Henry. Does not have any Texans bringbacks. Also does have Christian McCaffrey, DeAndre Swift, Xavier Hutchinson. Oh, sorry, we do have a Texans bringback in Xavier Hutchinson. Then we have Puka Nacua and the Broncos defense. Third lineup is CJ Stroud triple stack with Christian Kirk, Jaden Higgins, and Dalton Schultz. Again, no bringbacks from the Patriots. This one has DeAndre Swift, Christian McCaffrey, Luther Burden, Puka Nacua, and the Broncos defense. Notably, none of the lineups at the top have the quarterback with the opposing defense. We do get that finally with the fifth lineup. We've got a Josh Allen triple stack with Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Dalton Kincaid. And that one does have the Broncos defense. So it has, the full stack of the Bills plus the Broncos defense on the other side. I always want to kind of figure out how often does that come up in the Sims. So you do see it at least a little bit here. It's not actually all that prevalent, though, in this run of the Sims. But that Allen lineup also has Christian McCaffrey, Woody Marks, Stephon Diggs, Kyren Williams. Looking at my player exposures in this first run of the Sims, starting at quarterback in order of exposure, I have 23% Drake May, 22% CJ Stroud, 17% Caleb Williams, 14% Josh Allen, 10% Sam Darnold, 10% Matthew Stafford, 2% Bo Nix, and 2% Brock Purdy. At running back, I have 53% Christian McCaffrey, 42% DeAndre Swift, 33% James Cook, 29% Kyren Williams, 12% Woody Marks, 10% Zach Charbonnet, 8% Kenneth Walker, 7% Blake Corum, 6% Ramondre Stevenson, 5% RJ Harvey, 4% Kyle Monangai, 1% Trevion Henderson, and 1% Jaleel McLaughlin. At wide receiver, I have 51% Puka Nacua, 37% Jackson Smith and Jigba, 33% Christian Kirk, 30% Jaden Higgins, 27% Stephon Diggs, 24% Khalil Shakir, 21% Devonta Adams, 21% Keon Coleman, 20% Luther Burden, 16% Pop Douglas, 15% Romo Dunze, 13% Xavier Hutchinson, 7% Cortland Sutton, 7% Cooper Kupp, 5% DJ Moore, 4% Ricky Pearsall, 4% Kayshon Boutte, 3% Juwan Jennings, 1% Rashid Shaheed, and then 1% each of Pat Bryant and Troy Franklin. At tight end, I have 34% Dalton Kincaid, 33% Colston Loveland, 33% Dalton Schultz, 29% Hunter Henry, 11% AJ Barner, 5% Colby Parkinson, 3% Jake Tongas, 1% Dawson Knox, and 1% Tyler Higbee. And finally, at defense, I have 39% of the Broncos, 17% Bills, 16% Seahawks, 7% Texans, 7% 49ers, 6% Bears, 4% Patriots, 4% Rams. Before I get into the quarterbacks and how I might adjust them, I just want to give you a little bit of context. So just going to start with schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks over the last 5 weeks. In order of who has the best matchup over the last 5 weeks, it would be the Rams have the best matchup. So Matthew Stafford has the best matchup, followed by Drake May and the Patriots. Then we have Sam Darnold and the Seahawks, Caleb Williams and the Bears. And then below average matchups for Josh Allen and the Bills, Bo Nix and the Broncos, Brock Purdy and the Niners, and CJ Stroud and the Texans against the Patriots have the worst possible matchup, 6th worst in terms of schedule adjusted. In terms of pass rate over expectation on the season, Rams rank 3rd, Broncos 4th, Patriots 5th, Niners 9th, Texans 10th, Bears 20th, Seahawks 27th, Bills 28th. And I should note, my instinct is that the Texans are a great defense. So I was pretty surprised to see that this is actually a pretty positive matchup for Drake May. My instinct is just to load up on Sam Darnold and Matthew Stafford as the quarterbacks with, the best matchups. I think in most of our minds, those are the best matchups with this 49ers defense that's just really hurt. It was looking like Fred Warner might come back this week, but he is not going to be activated. So it's still a nice matchup for quarterbacks against the Niners. And then, of course, Stafford against the Bears. Just love that passing attack and a nice matchup with the Bears. Was a little bit surprised to see how good of a matchup it has been for quarterbacks against the Rams. Also, it's been, a slightly above average matchup against the Rams, which surprised me a bit. But the biggest surprise for me by far was that it's a positive matchup over the last 5 weeks for quarterbacks against the Texans. All of that said, I think the Sims kind of did things exactly how I think they should. I think the ownership is pretty good here. I think CJ Stroud, 4% projected ownership is the lowest that I've seen, but it's not by that much, and would not be that surprising to see CJ Stroud come in at fairly low ownership. No Nico Collins in this game. Not a great matchup for CJ Stroud. So maybe it will come in for 6% or something. I don't think that I want 22% of CJ Stroud, so I'll probably make some adjustments that will change that somewhat. I like what it did with Drake May. I think 13% projected ownership seems about right. I got to 23% as a result, and despite not really, thinking that it's a great matchup, gotta trust the numbers to some extent. And Drake May, I think, is also a good enough quarterback that he can, overcome a tough matchup. 17% Caleb Williams, well over the field there. I like that. I don't love that I'm only getting to 10% Sam Darnold and 10% Matthew Stafford. We'll see. Maybe I'll adjust some things that will lead to more of one or both of them, because those are, again, the two quarterbacks that, my instinct is I want to just play a lot of Darnold and Stafford. I might not force it depending on how the receivers look in terms of their projected ownership. If we get, lower ownership on Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Rashid Shaheed, maybe I'll think about, increasing my exposure to Darnold or Stafford, because again, I want to play these, but they are projected for more ownership, and I think every quarterback remaining in the playoffs has, the ability to put up a big score. So I'm not sure what I'm going to change yet as far as quarterbacks. I think that the projected ownership is pretty good, and the inputs are going to be good also. So I don't know that I should change that much here, but I'll think about it after looking at the exposures that I have elsewhere, because there are players that I have stronger opinions about at other positions. At running back, in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed over the last 5 weeks, this is the fourth best matchup for Bears running backs, so they have the best matchup of teams remaining. Then Seahawks, the sixth best matchup, down a little ways to the Denver running backs. Of course, Buffalo gets Ed Oliver back, who is their best rush grade at PFF is Ed Oliver. So the matchup gets a little bit tougher for RJ Harvey and Denver running backs with Ed Oliver returning, but it has been a positive matchup over the last 5 weeks. Then you get the Patriots running backs. Again, kind of surprising me that this has been a positive matchup over the last 5 weeks. Buffalo, it's been a pretty neutral matchup against Denver. Rams running backs, a slightly below average matchup. Texans running backs, a little worse than them. And then finally, it is the worst matchup for Christian McCaffrey and 49ers running backs against the Seahawks. It's the sixth worst matchup schedule adjusted over the last 5 weeks. Also, some additional context, just because I know typically you want to target running backs that are in games where their team is favored. They're going to run more in the second half, typically if they take a lead. It's a minor point, but it is something that people might be curious about. So we can see the totals here. If you go to the inputs, Denver favored by 1, Seahawks favored by 7, Patriots favored by 3, and then Rams favored by 4 in Chicago. Now, again, at running back, I only have 6 running backs here in double digits in terms of exposure, those being CMC at 53%, Swift at 42%, Cook at 33%, Kyron at 29%, Marks at 12%, and then Zach Charbonnet at 10%. You can see that the biggest place where I am different from the projected ownership in this first run of the Sims are DeAndre Swift projected for 13% ownership. I got to 42%, and then kind of the inverse of that, RJ Harvey projected for 49% ownership. I only got to 5% in this first run of the Sims. And I think both of those are directionally accurate, directionally where I would like to be. Like, I'd like to be overweight on DeAndre Swift if he only gets 13% ownership. Again, this has been a great matchup, or at least a pretty strong matchup with the Rams over the last 5 weeks. So if Swift doesn't get a lot of ownership, I would like to be over the field there. And then same thing with Harvey. Although it has been an above average matchup for running backs against the Bills, it does get tougher with Ed Oliver back. So Harvey, if he's going to get 49% ownership, I would like to be under the field. But in both cases, this is more extreme than I plan to be. I don't want only 5% Harvey. We just saw, the Jaguars last week were just running all over this Bills defense. They, were, chopping off 9 yards a carry, at least for the first 3 quarters of the game or so. So if Denver decides to establish it, I think they could have some success. I don't know to what extent Ed Oliver is going to affect things, or, how much he is going to play in his first game back. He might be a part-time player, not affect things that much. Maybe he makes a big difference. That remains to be seen. But regardless, I don't think I want just 5% RJ Harvey. I think that there is a world in which they lean on the run more, and RJ Harvey has a lot of success. So I don't want just 5% there. But that's not actually the place where I am going to change things the most. I have some pretty strong opinions at running back. Again, I like Swift quite a bit. I don't know if I'll cut back on this 42%. I'll probably cut back on it a little bit to get to some of the other running backs I like more. I really like the Seattle running backs. Now you can see Charbonnet projected for 23% ownership, Kenneth Walker projected for 24%, and the Sims are giving me a lot less. And it is tough because it is a split backfield for the Seahawks. With that said, Zach Charbonnet in particular looks great over their last 4 games. 52 rushing attempts for Charbonnet, 51 for Kenneth Walker. So Charbonnet actually leading in terms of rushing attempts. He's played 55% of the snaps to Kenneth Walker's 44%. So Charbonnet leading on that front as well. Also out targeting Kenneth Walker 11 to 10 on 42% route participation to Kenneth Walker's 27%. So Charbonnet in all of the usage metrics, and then you can see expected fantasy points also 56 for Charbonnet to 38 for Walker. Charbonnet's kind of taken over as the lead back for the Seahawks, and part of this goes into expected fantasy points, but part of it is also 100% of the inside the 5 carries for Zach Charbonnet over their last 4 games. So he's getting the inside the 5 carries, he's getting more carries, he's getting out targeting Kenneth Walker. Everything looks great for Zach Charbonnet. So he in particular stands out to me as a player that I want to be above the field on. If he's only going to get 23% ownership at 5,300, I am going to IKB it to get above the field on Zach Charbonnet. And honestly, Kenneth Walker, even though he does lately have the worst end of the split, he's just such an electric running back where he can make huge splash plays. So if he touches the ball, 13, 14 times in a game, it's not going to surprise anybody if he takes one of them 50 yards to the house, especially against this 49ers defense that has been really bad against running backs. So I am going to IKB it to get to more of Charbonnet and Walker. If I were choosing between them, it would be Charbonnet just because he has a much better workload over the last 5 weeks. But I like both of them. Probably what I'm going to do is bring up the rushing attack enough to get about even with the field on Kenneth Walker at 24%, and then maybe get to 40% or so of Zach Charbonnet, like well over the field there, because I love the usage for Charbonnet and obviously love this matchup with the Niners. Beyond those two, and everybody knows if you watch these shows regularly, I'm kind of a sucker for RB2s, players on the worst end of the split in general when they get low ownership. And that is something I'm going to be attacking quite a bit today. Stevenson and Henderson are both fine in their own right, getting low ownership, and I probably end up a little bit overweight on Henderson, at least just because of the big play upside. But those aren't the two that I'm most enthusiastic about. Obviously, we already talked about the Seahawks, and I don't know who you want to even consider the RB2 on the Seahawks, but I really do like Blake Corum at 3% ownership and Kyle Monunga at 4% ownership. I think both are very, very strong plays that I would like to have at least double-digit exposure. And I think ultimately what I'm going to do with a lot of my lineups is I'm probably going to end up underweight on Christian McCaffrey, which is a terrifying thing to do. He is, projected for 55% ownership, has just elite usage. I get all of that, but it's a tough matchup with the Seahawks. And I also really love the expensive wide receivers on this slate with JSN, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, all in just fantastic matchups. So I suspect I'm going to end up underweight on Christian McCaffrey, overweight on, or at least with the field on the expensive wide receivers, maybe end up overweight there, and then kind of work in more of these inexpensive running backs who are kind of getting overlooked. Again, in particular, I love the Seahawks running backs, but then Blake Corum, Kyle Monunga, I think have good enough roles and they're in good enough spots that I would like to have double-digit exposure to both, which is well over the field. Again, projected 3% for Corum, 4% for Monunga. And again, Swift at 13% ownership, I think is a great play. But just looking at the wild card game usage, because I think this is pretty good indication. Must-win game. What do they do in a must-win game? And of course, this is another must-win game. We saw Swift, get more carries than Monunga and play more snaps, but not by that much. So 51% snaps for Swift, 46% for Monunga. So yeah, Swift leads, but it's not by that much. 13 carries for Swift to 8 for Monunga. So yeah, pretty good lead in terms of carries, 5 more. But then also Monunga out-targeted Swift on just a little bit less route participation, 42% for Swift to 38% for Monunga. If we look at their last 5 weeks overall for just, more generally, how are things looking? It's 50 carries. Actually, this is 4 games. 50 carries for DeAndre Swift to 34 for Monunga. This does not count the wild card game, which we just looked at. But it was, Swift leading, but Monunga still having 8.5 carries per game over that span and more targets for Monunga. And Swift still leading in terms of route participation, but for whatever reason, when Kyle Monunga is out there, he is being targeted more than DeAndre Swift. So I think in a pretty nice matchup for Monunga and the price just at 5,000, not getting much ownership, I do think I'm going to end up wanting to be a bit overweight on Monunga. And Swift also, but maybe not quite to the extent that I am right now. I do think that Swift is, overall, he's probably going to see more volume. He is, I would say, the more explosive running back. So there is a lot to love about Swift. I don't want this to sound like I'm not a big fan of playing a ton of Swift, but I do think Monangai also getting even more overlooked than Swift over the last 5 weeks. In terms of inside the 5 carries, it's also Monangai 60% to Swift 40% overall over their last 5 games. So another reason to think that Monangai is a pretty strong play. Not that he's guaranteed to get the inside the 5 carries, but again, he is leading slightly. I think they're kind of interchangeable inside the 5-yard line. And then the Rams, it's kind of the same thing to a, I guess, somewhat lesser degree, because Kyren is, I'm getting lesser of Kyren. I don't think I want any less than what I'm getting right now. He's projected for 15% ownership. I'm getting to 29%. The Rams are also favored in this game, so it's a little bit more likely, I think, that they take a big lead. They're running the ball out in the fourth quarter. So I like Kyren quite a bit at 6,600 if he only gets 15% ownership. Right now I'm getting 29%. I don't want any less than that. So he would be one. I'd be less inclined to get to decrease my Kyren exposure than my Swift exposure or my CMC exposure. And then you have Blake Corum, though, also looks great at 5,100, so just slightly more expensive than Kyle Monangai, actually getting even less ownership than Monangai, and I'm already getting to 7%, so I don't need to do that much to get to a ton more Corum, but I think I do want double-digit exposure to Corum. Again, looking at the workload in the wild card game, so again, must-win game. Kyren 13 carries to Corum's 11, although Kyren did play 64% of the snaps to Corum's 36%, pretty close in terms of their actual rushing attempts, and then they each had 2 targets, despite Kyren basically doubling up Corum in terms of route participation, 37% to 19%. Over the 4 games prior to the wild card, kind of similar, 63 carries for Kyren to 44 for Corum in those 4 games. So that's 11 carries per game for Corum. And again, he got hurt in the first half in one of those games, missed the entire second half. So probably the split would be even closer without that injury to Corum. I will say, though, Kyren Williams, 14 targets over that span to Corum's 3. So Kyren much more involved in the passing game, also running more routes. And then in terms of inside the 5 carries, it's been an even split over their last 5 games. Each have taken 45.5% of the inside the 5 carries. But ultimately, Corum just getting 3% ownership in a game that the Rams are, I think, of, one of the spots where the team is more likely to have a big lead in the fourth quarter and really lean on the running back. Obviously, this is the playoffs. There's a chance that all these games are close, much like, last weekend we had a ton of close games. That could happen again, and we don't have any of these teams taking the air out of the ball, but it could happen here. And Corum, I think, would benefit in that scenario. And of course, he's just involved regardless. So I like Corum quite a bit at 5,100, getting 3% ownership. At wide receiver, in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed over the last 5 weeks, this is 4th best matchup for the Rams, the best matchup on this slate. Just a fantastic matchup for Rams receivers. Bears receivers, a positive matchup as well. Seahawks receivers is just a neutral matchup. Then it's the Patriots, a slightly below average matchup. Texans below them. Niners below them. And then a big drop down. Both the Bills and the Broncos playing each other have bottom 3 matchups for receivers. So again, as I noted earlier, I think the way that I want to play this slate is spend up at receiver, kind of take some shots on those less expensive, more contrarian running backs, which honestly is not something I do all that often, usually leaning into the chalk at running back. But this is a slate where I think that the chalk at running back is a little bit dicier than, when you have a full 12 game slate, and then some of the other running backs who are not getting a ton of ownership, to me, look like pretty good plays on this slate. So we're kind of flipping the script a little bit on how I usually play here, because again, I think Puka looks like a fantastic play, even at 57% ownership. JSN at 54% ownership. Love to get all the JSN that I can. Devontae Adams at 27% ownership. I suspect I end up over the field there as well. So the big 3 there at wide receiver are, I think, all fantastic plays. I'm going to lean into the Rams passing game, the Seahawks in general. Now, a few notes that, changing parts. First of all, Texans have already ruled out Nico Collins, which obviously benefits every other receiver on the Texans quite a bit. The Bills lose both Gabe Davis and Tyrell Shavers. So we're going to need some other receivers to step up for the Bills. And then Ricky Pearsall sounds like he's coming back for the Niners. So Demarcus Robinson probably loses most of his role with the return of Pearsall, although he was so good last week. Who knows? Maybe he retains some of it, but Pearsall probably eats into it, at least to some extent. With all this said, I'm actually just going to go team by team here. I think is probably the easier way to look at this. So I've sorted it by team. On the Bills, we'll go alphabetical here. Bills, Khalil Shakir, 5,100. I'm getting a 24%. That's probably fine. If I lose some of it, I don't mind. It's a tough matchup with Denver. I'm not really excited about the Bills in general. I think that Keon Coleman, a decent value at 3,500. As you can see here, I'm 5xing the field as of right now. You would expect more usage for Coleman with Cooks and Tyrell Shavers out. I still don't think that he's like a slam dunk play because we've had Coleman as a wide receiver 2 for most of the year, and for a lot of it, he didn't really do anything. So I don't think that we can look at Coleman and be like, oh, look at that value. You need to play Keon Coleman. But I think that he's, fine if he only gets 4% ownership. As you can see here, I'm getting to 5x the field. My guess is that comes down as I adjust things, but I'll probably be at least over the field if he comes in at 4%. And then Cooks, I'm currently not getting to any, but I think that Cooks is at least as strong of a play as Coleman. I actually think I might like Cooks better. He is $500 more expensive and projected for more ownership, but just seems to have, more of a connection with Josh Allen. So I think Cooks, I'll probably work in a bit of Cooks. On the Bears, I think I'm kind of okay with what the Sims are giving me. I think, it's a game that I really want to target as of right now with Burden projected for 13% ownership. I'm getting to 20%. Rome projected for 7%. I'm getting to 15%. DJ Moore, I'm getting to 5%, which is exactly where he's projected at. And then I'm not getting to any Olamide Zaccheaus. I think I'm fine with all of that. The Broncos, not a huge priority for me. I think Courtland Sutton, totally fine at 5,900, but he's getting 24% ownership. I do anticipate being under the field. I'm currently at 7%. Pat Bryant is probably my favorite of the wide receivers on the Broncos, 3,900. The downside is he is projected for 19% ownership. I'm only getting to 1% in this first run of the Sims. I will probably adjust to get to more of Pat Bryant. Again, I think that he is has a pretty strong role. You can kind of look at the route participation now. He missed week 15, missed week 17. I think he got hurt in week 16, but still overall, he's running more routes than Troy Franklin in the games that he plays in general when he can play the full game. Since their bye week, it has been Pat Bryant as a wide receiver 2 on the Broncos, and also just looking at their last 4 games. He's only played in 2 of those games. Troy Franklin still only has 3 more targets than Pat Bryant. So 2 games, 6.5 targets per game. I believe that includes the game that he left in the middle of one of the games. Also, he's at the very least been limited and still just getting more targets per game than Troy Franklin. So it's, Courtland Sutton clearly is the team leader in targets. He's really just after losing the wide receiver 1 role for a little while, has earned it back and then some in recent weeks. So it's Courtland Sutton. And then for me, just because of the price tag and being, I think, the pretty clear wide receiver 2 on the Broncos, it would be Pat Bryant as my second favorite. And then, if you want to play some Franklin or Mims, I think that's fine. I don't really think you can play Lil Jordan Humphrey on the 4-game slate, or I should say, I'm not going to play any Lil Jordan Humphrey on the 4-game slate. Again, looking at the route share report, the only games that he's really seen a big uptick in route participation have been the 2 games that Pat Bryant missed. So I don't really think we have any reason to play Lil Jordan Humphrey on the full slate. The Texans, again, going to be without Nico Collins, so we should find some value here. Christian Kirk, 4,100, projected for 17% ownership. I got to 33%. Higgins at 8% ownership at 4,600. I'm getting to 30%. Xavier Hutchinson, 3,400 at 9% projected ownership. I'm getting to 13%. And then Jalen Noel at 3,600, not projected for any ownership, and I did not get to any. Looking at the route share report for the Texans, just to find games that Nico Collins either missed or was significantly limited, there are 4 games that Nico Collins either didn't play or ran under 60% of the routes. Dating back to week 5, he only ran 54.5% of the routes. Week 7, 48%. Didn't play week 8, and then didn't play in week 18. So I wanted to look at those 4 games to see what the usage has looked like for the Texans without Nico Collins in general. So I pulled up just those 4 games. And it is Dalton Schultz leading in targets. But for the receivers, Xavier Hutchinson, 22 targets on 75.2% route participation. Jaden Higgins, 20 targets on 66% route participation. Jalen Knoll, 17 on 36% route participation. And then Christian Kirk also missed 2 of those games. So he was only in 2 games, but 6 targets on 62.3% route participation. So the one that stands out to me is Xavier Hutchinson, not getting a ton of ownership, 22 targets, leading the wide receivers in games that Nico Collins has been out or significantly limited. And then Jaden Higgins. Now, you can make the case that, one of these games goes back to week 5. And of course, with Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll being rookies, they're the ones you would kind of expect to take on bigger roles as the season goes along. So, if we go all the way back to week 5, it was just 58% route participation for Higgins to 67% for Hutchinson. And it's gotten closer as the year has gone on. And in week 7, actually, also, we had Hutchinson clearly leading Higgins. And then if you go into the more recent games, it has been Higgins taking on a bigger role. Actually, as soon as week 8, Higgins ran more routes than Hutchinson. And then week 18, we saw Higgins actually lead Hutchinson in terms of route participation. And we've seen him take on a bigger role in the playoffs. They both actually had fairly nice roles in the wild card round. Hutchinson, 66% of routes. Actually, Hutchinson did lead pretty significantly over Higgins in terms of routes in the wild card round. Higgins had 4 targets, matching Hutchinson in the wild card game. But Hutchinson kind of seems to be a little bit overlooked as the veteran. He's been the one who's been targeted the most in games without Nico Collins. So I actually think Hutchinson is a really strong play. I might boost up Hutchinson a little bit. I like Higgins, and then Kirk. I don't know if he's projected for the most ownership. I have less enthusiasm there. I think I loved him last week because it was a slot funnel matchup. And I thought he could break out at really low ownership there. As he gets more ownership in, a less strong matchup, I'm less enthusiastic about Kirk. I'll probably end up with less than the 33% I'm getting right now, and kind of move more of that to Hutchinson, Higgins, who I think benefit more from Nico Collins being out. On the Rams, I don't think we need to get too into it. Give me all the Puka Nacua, all the Devonta Adams. I don't really think you need to play any of the other receivers on the Rams. It was actually Xavier Smith who was third of the receivers in terms of route participation in the wild card round, ran 47% of the routes. But they do get Terrence Ferguson back, and I suspect they're going to run more 2 and 3 tight end sets. So Xavier Smith probably gets cut out here. You can probably just avoid all of the receivers outside of Puka Nacua and Devonta Adams, who are big priorities for me. I think I'll end up over the field on Adams, at least with the field, maybe even over the field on Puka Nacua. I plan to, pay up at receiver. And I like these Rams receivers quite a bit. Patriots receivers, again, not the biggest priority for me, but I am getting to some Drake May. So I'm obviously going to play some of the Patriots receivers. I think Diggs is the biggest priority. He is the pretty clear lead receiver for the Patriots at this point. It's projected for 18% ownership. I got to 27%. Happy to be over the field on Diggs. Kayshon Boutte, probably my second favorite, or I should say almost definitely my second favorite of the Patriots receivers, projected for 8% ownership at 4,300. Looking at the usage in the wild card round, Boutte was actually second of the receivers in route participation at 73%. He is also the second most expensive, getting 8% ownership, but we know he has big play upside. Not my favorite matchup with the Texans, but Boutte is a very capable receiver at low ownership, a relatively low price tag. So I like Boutte a little bit. Probably end up with the field, I would guess, on Boutte at 8%. Pop Douglas, 3,300, getting just 3% ownership. I got to 16% in this run of the Sims. That probably comes down as I pay up more at receiver and maybe get to some other quarterbacks a little bit more. But Pop Douglas was third of the Patriots receivers in route participation, 53% of the routes in the wild card round. Just saw 2 targets. Also capable of pretty big plays. So no issue being above the field on Pop Douglas at low ownership and a low price tag. You don't really need that much to pay off that salary. I think he's a fine play, but not somebody that I, if I cut back on my pop exposure as I try to get to other receivers, I think I'm okay with getting just a little bit over the 3% projected ownership. I don't think I need 16% of pop. And then I think I'm okay not getting to Kyle Williams or Efton Chisholm. Obviously, Kyle Williams has made some big plays, but at 3,800, I think there are other receivers in his price range that are likelier to put up, 15, 20 fantasy points. So Kyle Williams, not a big priority for me. The Seahawks, I'm kind of looking for ways to play the Seahawks stack that is a little bit more contrarian, because everybody who plays Sam Darnold, or almost everybody who plays Sam Darnold, going to have JSN in the lineup. JSN projected for 54% ownership, and I think he's a great play. I'm going to play a ton of JSN also, but then how can I get different? So again, I think I probably end up with the field at 54% JSN. I think that he's fantastic. Cooper Kupp, 3,500 projected for 15% ownership. I'm getting to 7%. I suspect I'll get more as I try to get to more of the Seahawks passing game. But the one that I find the most interesting is Rashid Shaheed. Now, bear with me. I'm going to make a case that is almost feels like I'm chasing a rabbit hole here to try to make a case for Rashid Shaheed, but he's only 4,200. I love the splash play potential for Shaheed, and I'm just trying to find ways to get different within playing the Seahawks. And here's the case that I'll make for Rashid Shaheed. So he's 4,200 projected for 7% ownership. Now the Seahawks didn't play in the wild card round. Over their last 4 games, Rashid Shaheed has run 56% of routes, only 10 targets. So, 2.5 targets per game. I'm not making a great case yet for Rashid Shaheed. I understand that. I hear that. He doesn't look that great. Just looking at this year, he kind of had a pretty big down year this year in general. But I think that there are, if you dig a little bit deeper, there are reasons to maybe think Rashid Shaheed could be great here. So now here's where it gets a little bit convoluted. Looking at the amount of man coverage the Niners have played this year, they played the ninth lowest man coverage rate of any defense on the season. So the Niners they don't play a ton of man coverage in general. And this year, that has not actually been that beneficial for Rashid Shaheed. You can see here this season, the coverage grade actually a slightly negative matchup for Rashid Shaheed with the Niners. So I'm stretching a little bit to find a great case for Rashid Shaheed. But you may recall last year, my co-host on Outside the Box, Scott Barrett, was known as the Rashid Shaheed Whisperer. And it was partially because there have in the past been pretty big splits for Rashid Shaheed, man versus zone. So if we look at last year, Rashid Shaheed 2.52 yards per route run against zone coverage, as opposed to just 1.22 for against man coverage. So much better against zone historically. This year, that has not been the case. We have not seen the same kind of split, but still, this has been kind of a weird year for Rashid Shaheed. Starting on the Saints, a lot of different, quarterback looks, and then he gets traded late in the year. I don't know. I'm trying to make a case here for Rashid Shaheed, and this one it's strong enough for me. Maybe it's not strong enough for you to want to play Rashid Shaheed, but the fact that he historically has been very good against zone defense, the Niners play zone defense 80% of the time this year. I would expect that to continue this weekend, and I think that it should benefit Rashid Shaheed. We know that he has big splash play potential. You're kind of counting on him hitting on at least one big splash play, but at 4,200, 7% projected ownership in just a overall good matchup against the Niners, 4 receivers, and then the micro matchup, if we pull it back to years past, would have been a great one for Rashid Shaheed. Maybe it's stretching it to look back at last year when he was healthy for most of this year, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to be playing some Rashid Shaheed, hoping that he can continue to crush zone coverage or get back to crushing zone coverage, at least for 1 week against the Niners. So there's the best case I can make is Rashid Shaheed, his ADOT is pretty far down the field. It's a matchup that he should do well in against the Niners. We haven't really seen it much this year, but when you're a short slate trying to find contrarian plays, I think Rashid Shaheed is a pretty strong one. And then finally, the Niners, again, not a huge priority for me because the Seahawks have just been one of the best defenses in the NFL. Juwan Jennings did lead all receivers in the wildcard round, all remaining receivers in route participation. So there is that, but Ricky Pearsall comes back, kind of muddles everything. We don't have George Kittle, so I guess there is your great case for the Niners is one of their target hogs is out. I'm still finding it difficult to get too enthusiastic about any of these receivers. Jennings at 10% ownership seems fine. I'm only getting to 3%. Pearsall at 9% projected ownership seems okay at 4,800. I'm only getting to 4% right now. Who knows if he's going to be limited at all? I think I'm probably just going to take what the Sims give me with regard to Niners receivers. Tough to really prioritize them in this matchup with the Seahawks. At tight end, in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed over the last 5 weeks, it is the best matchup of the remaining teams for Hunter Henry and the Patriots, followed by AJ Barner has the second best matchup with the Niners. Then you drop down a ways, pretty neutral matchup for Dalton Kincaid and Dalton Schultz, right in the middle of the pack in terms of schedule adjusted. It's a negative matchup for Colston Loveland. And then Rams tight ends, and there's a lot of them, have a bottom 7 matchup. Jake Tongas and the Niners tight ends bottom 5 matchup. And then finally, Evan Ingram has the third worst matchup for tight ends. So kind of a wide range of matchups here for the tight ends. Looking at their my exposure in this first run, honestly, I thought that my biggest take here was going to be let's just play all the Dalton Schultz at 13% ownership, and that's what the Sims are giving me. They're already giving me 33% Dalton Schultz. I think that he's kind of underrated in how much he benefits from Nico Collins being out. Again, I guess I don't have it pulled up anymore, but he led the team in targets in games where Nico Collins ran under 60% of the routes. And I think CJ Stroud tends to lean on Dalton Schultz when Nico Collins is out, while, Jaden Higgins has kind of ascended throughout the year. I wouldn't be that surprised to see CJ Stroud just go back to really leaning on Dalton Schultz. But the Sims are already giving me that, so I don't really need to do anything to adjust for Schultz. Colston Loveland has, the role has just been pretty great for Colston Loveland. Last week we saw him continue to be the alpha pass catcher with all of the receivers back. So Loveland, looks great at just 17% ownership. It's harder for me to be enthusiastic about the Rams tight ends now that Terrence Ferguson is back. We saw last week Higbee and Parkinson were kind of just in a timeshare. They ran about the same number of routes. They each were targeted 3 times. It kind of came down to Parkinson scored the touchdown, so ended up doing better than Higbee, but neither of them actually had that great of a role last week. And now Terrence Ferguson being back kind of just muddies things up even more. So as much as I want to attack with the Rams, it's tough for me to find much enthusiasm for any of their tight ends, even at low ownership. I think I'll make sure to have some exposure to both Parkinson and Higbee. I don't even know if I will force in any Ferguson in his first game back. But yeah, tough to find a lot of enthusiasm there. Tongas is one that I thought I would be excited about because he actually has a pretty great role when Kittle is out earlier in the year, targeted like 6 times per game. We saw him last week, saw some targets with Kittle out, but he's getting 20% projected ownership. So I probably will end up under the field on Tongas. Then you've got AJ Barner, again, has a great matchup with the Niners. I think that's another way, he's only projected for 15% ownership. I might boost my Barner a bit when I boost the Seattle offense as a whole, but I don't really know how much more I'm going to get than the 11% I'm getting right now. So honestly, I don't have any great takes at tight end because I think the Sims are already doing a great job. I think Dalton Schultz should be a priority if he only gets 13% ownership. He's somebody I'll focus on. Otherwise, I think the Sims generally doing a pretty good job doing about what I'd like them to do. At defense, typically I let the Sims give me what they're going to give me. I think I'll make some adjustments here just because I would like more of the Patriots against that Texans offensive line, just a really weak offensive line. Patriots only projected for 8% ownership, partially because they're kind of expensive. But I think I'll probably end up getting above the field on the Patriots. I've been kind of a Sam Darnold hater. As a Vikings fan, I just watched him. He was too bad at the end of the season last year. I keep expecting the other shoe to drop. Hasn't really dropped yet. But Niners at just 2,200, 15% projected ownership against Sam Darnold. I do have interest there. The ownership is high enough that it's not going to be a huge priority for me, but love the price tag for the Niners. And then on the opposite end of that game, I also love the Seahawks, but they are getting 20% projected ownership. I'm getting to 16%. I probably just take what they give me. So not going to change all that much with the defenses. Okay, so I'm just going to make a few changes here, run the Sims one more time, tell you what I get, and then any further changes that I would make. So first of all, starting with the Bills, I think I wanted to prioritize Brandon Cooks a little bit more, and currently Keon Coleman projected to have a much better market share of the receiving work than Brandon Cooks. I'm just going to adjust that a little bit. So I'm going to take down Keon Coleman down to 14% and bring Brandon Cooks up to 15%. I think would be more in line with my expectation here. So I'm going to bring Coleman again down 4 points down to 14%. Cooks up to 15%. I think that'll be enough to get to a little bit more Cooks. We do see Coleman getting the much better touchdown market share. I think that is probably fair. So I think I will leave that as it is. No real other changes on the Bills. They're not the biggest priority for me. On the Broncos, now I was not getting to much RJ Harvey at all in that last run. I might give him just a bit more of the rushing work to try, I want to have at least like 15% RJ Harvey probably. So I'm going to give him more of the rushing work. And I don't really need to get any of these other running backs on the Broncos. So I'm just going to bring Jaleel McLaughlin down to a 14% rushing market share, RJ Harvey up to 55%. I think that they could lean on Harvey a little bit more in this game than they usually do. They might have success here against the Bills. So I want to make sure I get some Harvey. And then Pat Bryant is, I think, going to, he's, I believe I consider him the wide receiver 2 at this point on the Broncos. Now that's not totally clear, but I think Bryant is somebody that I want to make sure I get some of. So I'm going to kind of flip Bryant and Franklin here. Going to bring Franklin down to a 14% receiving market share and bring Bryant up to 15%. And I think that might be enough to get a little bit more Bryant than I'm getting right now. In general, going to take what I get from the rest of them. Evan Ingram, I didn't get to any. I'm a little bit tempted to adjust that because he's kind of hit or miss in terms of how they use Evan Ingram, but I don't think it's enough that I'm going to force it. I think those are the only changes I'm going to make in this first game. Second game, obviously a bigger one for me because I'm pretty into the Seahawks in general. I don't think I'm going to change anything on the Niners other than maybe I'll increase the sack rate a little bit just because, again, I think they might have more success than expected against Sam Darnold, depending on which Sam Darnold shows up. But I also do really like the passing game for the Seahawks and the running game for the Seahawks. So in order to get a good amount of both, I am going to have to increase the overall team rates. So I'm going to bring the points scored for the Seahawks up to 28, the pace up to 61. I think that'll be enough to get, more of the running game without sacrificing the passing game. Could also increase the rush rate for the Seahawks. I might even need to move it up more if I want more, because I want more than the field of certainly Charbonnet, and then probably parts of the passing game also. So I think I'm going to move this up even more, up to 29 points scored. I think that'll be enough to get a ton of the Seahawks. I'm also going to flip the usage here, I think, for Charbonnet and Walker in terms of the rushing market share. Now, Charbonnet already getting more of the rushing touchdown market share, but I am going to get him just a little bit more of the other work because I think in recent weeks he's actually been leading in terms of receiving work and rushing work. So I'm going to just flip these. I'm going to move Walker down to 40, Charbonnet up to 41%, and then in receiving, they're currently showing as even, but I think Charbonnet actually going to get a bit more of that work. So I'm going to bring him up to 9%, Walker down to 7%, and then I think that'll probably be enough for me to get to a bit more Charbs without sacrificing too much Walker because I'm giving the team more work in general. And then, again, I want to lean more on Rashid Shaheed here. Now, I love JSN, don't want to get rid of JSN at all, but I do want to make sure I get to more of Rashid Shaheed and lean into the matchup a little bit. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of any usage for Tariq Young. So we'll bring up Shaheed there to 13% receiving market share. And then on top of that, I'm going to bring down Cooper Kupp's usage a little bit and give some more usage to Rashid Shaheed. So I'm going to bring Kupp down to 14% and Rashid up to 15%. And I think by doing that, I should get more of Rashid Shaheed. Now, he's still not getting too much touchdown market share. I'm not sure if this is working. I'm going to bring down Cooper Kupp to 15% touchdown market share and Rashid Shaheed up to 13%. And I think that will should be enough to get a bit more Rashid Shaheed, I would think. I do also like AJ Barner a bit. I think the amount, the way that I changed the scoring is probably enough. And then finally the Seahawks defense. I'm already getting to a fair amount. They're projected for a lot of ownership. Maybe I'd just leave that as is. Texans and Patriots. Not going to do much here in terms of the Texans. I do kind of think Xavier Hutchinson going a bit overlooked, and Kirk, I kind of think the matchup not quite as strong this week as, I mean, last week was just a fantastic matchup for slot receivers. This week it's a below average matchup for slot receivers. So I think that they might lean on Christian Kirk a little bit less, and he's getting a lot of ownership. So I'm actually going to reduce his usage a bit down to 17%. I'll bring Hutchinson up to 17% also. And then I'll also adjust the touchdown. So for Kirk, I'm going to bring him down to an 18% touchdown market share. Hutchinson up to 17%. That should be enough to get a little bit more of Xavier Hutchinson, a little bit less of Christian Kirk. I was already getting a bit of Higgins, so happy with that. And then Schultz, he's the one that I really want to focus on, prioritize, but I'm already getting to some Schultz. Not going to change anything else there on the Texans. I do like Kayshon Boutte a bit. I'm going to give him a bit more usage. So first of all, I don't want to overdo it here. I think the Patriots, I like the running backs also. So I'm relative to how much I was getting. Like Trevion at 2% ownership, I want to be above that number. So maybe I will increase the rush rate just a little bit to 47% and the rush touchdown rate up to 40%. And maybe that's enough to get a little bit more of Henderson and Stevenson. And then Boutte, I think I might just get rid of Efton Chisholm usage and spread that out a little bit. Bring Boutte up to first I'll click Smart Adjust, bring Boutte up to a 14% receiving market share. And that'll get us close. And then maybe I'll bring Pop Douglas up to 13%. I think that is good enough for the Patriots. Oh, and then I want a little bit more of their defense, so I'm going to bring the sack rate up to 7%. And then we'll move on to the Rams and the Bears. Now, again, I really love the Rams in general. I want to get to more of both Corum and Monangai, but then I also like the passing game for the Rams quite a bit. So similar to what I did with the Seahawks, I am just going to prioritize the Rams a little bit more, bring up their points scored, bring up their pace, just a little bit here. I like both the running game and the passing game, so I don't really want to mess with the rush rate and touchdown rate right now. I think I'll leave that as is. I think that by doing that, and again, the only receivers I really want are Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. They already have pretty great rate numbers here, so I don't think I will change anything there. The other thing that I want to do is make sure I get a bit more of Blake Corum. And it was Kyron Moore involved in the passing game, so I don't really want to change much there. But maybe I'll get Corum just a little bit more of this rushing work. If I move Kyron down to a 47%, bring Corum up to 40% rushing market share, I think that should be enough to get a bit more Corum. And I'm not sure if this is smart adjusting, so I'm going to turn that off and bring Kyron down to 40. Bring them both to 43%. Rushing touchdown market share. There we go. Hopefully that'll be enough to get a little bit of Corum. And then finally on the Bears side, I'm getting to a ton of Swift and I'm not getting to much Monangai. I want to make sure I get a bit more of Monangai. So I'm going to just bring down Swift to a 44% rushing market share and bring Monangai up to 37%. Oh, not 337, 37%. There we go. Hopefully that gets me a bit more of Monangai. And then as far as the receivers and tight ends, I don't think I had any changes I needed to make there. So I think those are all just going to make those few changes for now. I'll run the sims one more time and then I'll let you know what I get. All right, so after making a few adjustments, I'll read off my top lineups and new exposures. So top lineup now is Sam Darnold, triple stacked with Rashid Shaheed, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and AJ Barner. Doesn't have any bringbacks from the Niners, does have Blake Corum, RJ Harvey, Khalil Shakir, Puka Nacua, and the Broncos defense. So love to see this is kind of in line with what I was trying to do, where I've got both Puka Nacua and JSN. In order to make that work, I now have Blake Corum in this lineup. So we're getting, making improvements closer to the lineups that I shouldn't even call them improvements, I should say, getting closer to the types of lineups that I want to play. Second lineup, CJ Stroud, triple stack with Jaden Higgins, Xavier Hutchinson, and Dalton Schultz. Does not have any Patriots, does have Christian McCaffrey, DeAndre Swift, JSN, Devontae Adams, and the Broncos defense. Third lineup is Drake May, double stack with Stephon Diggs and Pop Douglas. Doesn't have any Texans, does have Blake Corum, Christian McCaffrey, Khalil Shakir, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Dalton Kincaid, and the Broncos defense. In terms of player exposure, I may have overdone it. These are like the lineups in general looking closer to how I want them to look. But I now have 37% Sam Darnold, up from, I believe, 10% in the last run. So I wanted to get to more Darnold. I got to more Darnold. We'll see if I got enough of the running backs. If I didn't, I'll make adjustments there. I'm now getting to 17% CJ Stroud, 16% Drake May, 11% Caleb Williams, 9% Matthew Stafford, 9% Josh Allen, 1% Bo Nix, none of Brock Purdy. At running back, I have 50% Christian McCaffrey, 32% Blake Corum, 27% James Cook, 27% Kyron Williams, 21% RJ Harvey, 19% DeAndre Swift, 17% Zach Charbonnet, 9% Woody Marks, 6% Kyle Monangai, 5% Ramondre Stevenson, 4% Kenneth Walker, 1% Trevion Henderson. At wide receiver, I now have 66% Jackson Smith and Jigba, 44% Puka Nacua, 29% Jaden Higgins, 27% Khalil Shakir, 24% Rashid Shaheed, 23% Stephon Diggs, 21% Xavier Hutchinson, 19% Devontae Adams, 18% Pop Douglas, 17% Luther Burden, 15% Christian Kirk, 12% Cooper Kupp, 9% Rome Odunze, 5% Kayshon Boutte, 5% Brandon Cooks, 4% Cortland Sutton, 2% Pat Bryant, 2% Ricky Pearsall, 2% DJ Moore, 2% Keon Coleman, 1% Juwan Jennings. At tight end, I now have 30% Dalton Kincaid, 30% Hunter Henry, 29% Dalton Schultz, 24% Colston Loveland, 20% AJ Barner, 2% Colby Parkinson, 1% Tongas, and 1% Hooper. And then finally at defense, I now have 41% of the Broncos, 13% Bills, 11% Seahawks, 9% Niners, 9% Patriots, 8% Texans, 5% Rams, and 4% Bears. So the biggest adjustment that I can see right away is I'm getting to a ton of the Seahawks passing game. I probably overdid it on that front, now getting to 37% Darnold and 66% JSN and 24% Rashid Shaheed, 12% Cooper Kupp, which that seems fine. So generally, after making those changes, I got to a ton more of the Seahawks passing game, but didn't actually get to any more of the Seahawks running game, or that much more. So I'm now at 17% Charbonnet, so a little bit more, but then down to 4% Kenneth Walker. So immediately what I know I need to do is increase the rush rate and the rush touchdown rate for the Seahawks, and that'll bring down the numbers a little bit for the whole Seahawks passing game and bring up the running game. And again, I kind of want to be overweight on both, but maybe prioritize the running game a little bit more. So that's the first adjustment I need to make, is just increase the rushing rates for the Seahawks so that I get to a little bit more of the running backs, a little bit less of the passing game in general for the Seahawks. So that's the first big change I need to make. Would also maybe like a little bit more Matthew Stafford. I'm still underweight there at just 9%. Otherwise, I'd say things moving in the right direction. I don't have quite as much CJ Stroud as I had before. Still overweight on Drake May. Generally happy with my quarterback exposures. At running back, I probably overdid it with Blake Corum. I gave him like a 7% increase in rush rate. I'm now getting to 32%. That's kind of when you're dealing with a player at that price tag and making a bunch of different changes in conjunction, it kind of makes sense that I would get to well above the field, but I probably overdid it, now getting to 32%. I'd be happy with 10 to 15% Blake Corum. So I can adjust further on that front. Still over the field on Kyron, so glad to see that. I am closer to the field now. I'm up to 21% RJ Harvey. Still less than half the field, but that's a number I'm a bit more comfortable with. I cut way down on my DeAndre Swift, which was not really intentional. I got to a little bit more of Kyle Monangai, but still not enough. I think I'd like double digit there. So maybe need to increase things for the Bears running game a little bit to get a little bit more DeAndre Swift and more Kyle Monangai. But, I'm certainly moving in the right direction. The biggest thing, of course, being getting more of the Seahawks running backs. I could, maybe even things out, bring down the cut this Blake Corum exposure in half and spread that out to Swift and Monungai and some of the other running backs that I like, but certainly moved in the right direction as far as running backs go. At wide receiver, I said I wanted to have a ton of the pay-ups, and I do have a ton of JSN, and I'm below the field on Puka Nacua, but still a fair amount. I still didn't get to a ton of Devontae Adams. I will make adjustments to get to more Adams. I thought I would get there naturally by adjusting the Rams. Didn't happen, so I would want to move that further. But in general, I got to more Xavier Hutchinson now. Happy to see that the changes I made there increased my Xavier Hutchinson, did cut back significantly on Christian Kirk, but still have 15%. So it's not like I'm not getting to Kirk. I'd be fine with 24% Rashid Shaheed, I think. I mean, that's a little bit more than I think I need, but I would like to be over the field there. So changes worked as far as Shaheed goes. I'm still well over the field on Pop Douglas. I brought up my Keyshawn Boutte exposure a bit from where it was, actually still just at 5%. So I take that back. I didn't move that up that much. I'm getting into some Brandon Cooks now, so that's good to see. I'm not slamming Keon Coleman anymore. Still getting a 2%. I'll debate if I want to bring that number up. Again, I don't think that he's like an awesome play, but I think he's a pretty good play at 3,500. So I'll probably increase my Keon Coleman a bit. Still only getting a 2% Pat Bryant. I will have to adjust further to get to more Pat Bryant. And I probably don't need as much Khalil Shakir as I'm getting right now. I'm at 27%. He's not like a huge priority for me. I want to have some Khalil Shakir, but I'll probably cut back on that to get to some of the other receivers that I like. At tight end, I'm still getting to 29% Schultz, so glad to be well over the field there. Brought up my AJ Barner to 20%. That's good to see. Still getting 24% Loveland over the field there. In general, mostly okay with my tight end exposure. I don't think I want just 1% Jake Tongus. Like, I think he could be targeted like 7 or 8 times in any given game. So even in a tough matchup at 3,400, I probably want more than 1%. That feels a bit too risky across a full portfolio. But I would say in general, tight end moving in the right direction. Defense, I really don't think I need 41% of the Broncos against Josh Allen. Really great defense, and Josh Allen can turn the ball over, but I just don't feel the need to take this big of a stand. So I will have to further adjust to get to more of some of the other defenses I like the Patriots, the Niners, the Seahawks. I'd rather get to more of those at the expense of this kind of big stand on the Broncos. And then also, the Rams, I think, are all the defenses are probably in play on this slate. So I don't really think I need to be taking this huge stand on the Broncos. I'll probably have to make some adjustments to even that out a little bit. Hope you found that helpful. Again, I dug into the slate enough to give you some of my thoughts on adjustments that I'll make at Run the Sims. I think that you can use that even if you're not using the Sims. Hopefully I gave you enough information, ideas of the players that I like and the players that the Sims like, and you can kind of mix and match what you like of those players. But appreciate you watching the video. Please do like it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And if you're interested in checking out a new Discord, the Flaniverse Discord is free to join. There's a link in the description of this video. Thanks everybody. Good luck this weekend.